I want to very quickly discuss the Mirror's campaign on banning the XL Bully dogs, which I think this show is probably the only Mirror outlet to raise any concerns about at all. Last week, after Ian Price was killed by two of these dogs who had broken into his elderly mother's garden from a neighbour's, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, finally said the XL Bully would be added to the banned breeds list in the Dangerous Dogs Act. Now, owners of XL Bullies, many of whom say their pets are harmless and gentle if they're well looked after, have been cross about a possible mass cull, haven't they, Lizzie, of animals that haven't had any kind of issue at all. Any pet owner might be a bit worried about that. So what are the government actually saying about this cull? Is that going to go ahead?
So there's sort of two issues here. I mean, the Prime Minister on, I think it was the end of last week, said that the government would look at banning the XL Bully. So there are, I think, 4 different kinds of bully dog, and XL is obviously the largest. I think they can be as large as 9 stone, which is absolutely enormous. So they've said that they'll add that to the sort of banned breed legislation. And as you said, the Dangerous Dog Act kind of it characterises dogs by breed, which has been quite controversial among dog owners, some of whom argue that it is the owner's responsibility to control their dog. Not all dogs of a certain breed are aggressive, like that, it kind of removes the onus from owners to basically control their dogs. And some people will have a dog that is not as large as an XL Bully or as aggressive, but they've bred it to fight or they've trained it to be aggressive, and that the kind of legislation doesn't really take hold of that. But yeah, so the Prime Minister has said that they're going to look at banning the XL Bully by the end of the year. But then I think the Chief Veterinary Officer has now said that owners of XL Bully dogs the dogs are not required to be culled. What they'll have to do is you have to register your dog, and I think it will need to be neutered and wear a muzzle in public. But there won't sort of be a mass cull of these dogs. So that obviously, some people think that doesn't go far enough, that all XL Bully dogs are just too aggressive. Other people, would argue that some people say that these dogs, if trained well, can be safe and it's not fair to cull all dogs of a certain breed just because of a number of incidents, basically.
Exactly. If you're going to ban the XL Bully, I mean, what about the X-Bully? Because they're still going to be big. Even the small bully, I would suggest, is probably still going to have a bit of pounds per square inch jaw pressure to worry about. Now, Laura says, I don't believe it's the dog. It's very much the owner. Dogs are born not knowing how to be nasty, to kill or to harm. It's the influences around them. And I should just point out, on behalf of dog owners, you don't train a dog to be aggressive. You abuse and mistreat a dog in order to make it aggressive. And so, that's training shows care and consideration and the system of reward and things like that. And that's not how you get a dog to be aggressive. It's something that's entirely different. And what do you think, everybody? Because some people are saying that if you just muzzle these dogs in public and ask them to be neutered, number one, are you sure they're neutered? How can you check it all? Number two, muzzles can come off. Dogs can still attack sometimes. And there might still be attacks from dogs that their owners are trying their best with, but they're extremely large and powerful animals that are going to be a possible threat. So, I mean, muzzling, not killing them all is probably good for your dog owner, but yet muzzling them is not necessarily the solution. Are we going to have any particular issues, you think? They're talking about adding, as you said there, Lizzie, the breeds to the banned breeds list. But, the Dangerous Dogs Act, as you've said, is a pretty panicky bit of legislation. It was brought in a hurry as the result of a media campaign about devil dogs, I'm afraid. It's badly written. Are we actually going to have fresh legislation, do you think? Or are we stuck with trying to use the DDA?
By the sounds of it, at the moment, we're stuck with the DDA. I mean, all the kind of conversation. Obviously, there has been increased alarm because of a number of quite high-profile incidents recently. That there are conversations kind of going on in Westminster about whether the legislation is working or not. But at the moment, as far as I understand it, they're still looking at it working within the existing legislation. There are obviously reasons for that, kind of separate from what's going on in the sense that if you just look at the boring kind of mechanics of the parliamentary timetable, we're about a year out from the election. They've got the government are trying to rush through several quite knotty bills at the moment that keep being sort of amended in the Lords. We're going to have a King's Speech in November when they're going to set out kind of their plan for the next year. There's not a lot of time to start doing something really massive, and write a new bit of legislation on dangerous dogs would take quite a long time. There would be a lot of people you'd need to consult. There would be lots of different views on it, I'm sure. So if they said, okay, we're going to bring in a whole new bill, that would take quite a long time. So I think clearly what they're looking at right now is just adding the XL Bully to the Dangerous Dogs Act and to the banned breeds. But whether that's enough is a different question. As you say, the Mirror has been campaigning on this issue and looking for an overhaul of the Dangerous Dogs Act, because a lot of people say as a piece of legislation, it's not really fit for purpose.
No. So fundamentally, the government's only going to do something that's pretty bad because it really isn't expecting to be here next year. That's like an admission of defeat, really, isn't it? Now, Mike says, couldn't they bring back the dog license so owners can be registered, banned if they're shown to own a dangerous dog of any breed, make having a dog without a license an offence? That's often said when this kind of thing comes up, Mike, but unfortunately, the main argument against it is that people who are poorer wouldn't pay for the licenses. And that would mean that you're not having pets in poorer families. And it isn't automatic that if you're poorer or not be able to afford the license, and of course, perhaps having it renewed and stuff like that you don't have a right to have a dog seems a bit unreasonable. And what will end up happening is an awful lot of unlicensed dogs that aren't checked and registered. And that then there's a huge body of animals that somehow have to be checked and maintained. It's daft, some of it. The idea of a license doesn't really work. Steve says, if a 9-stone dog attacks a small child, even if it's wearing a muzzle, it'll still do a lot of harm. They are very, very big dogs. And the argument for the Dangerous Dogs Act, okay, is that those breeds that are on it, and I think there's only about 3 or 4, I can't remember all of them, one of them's a Doge, there have been no fatal dog attacks since they were banned from those breeds. Right, number one. That is the biggest argument for banning a breed. Unfortunately, what it does mean is that, if you've got something that's a bit like that breed and you cross it with someone else, you're still keeping some of these breed characteristics, but passing it to a different kind of dog that manages to get around the legislation, perhaps. And there are postmen, the length and breadth of this great country, that will tell you it's not just the big ones that are the issue. There's plenty of smaller dogs that are capable of causing a lot of injury too. And even if they don't kill, they're quite capable of disfiguring, especially when it comes to a child. So there's going to have to be something done somewhere, isn't there? But no one's quite sure what it is. And it's not going to be done by a government that's in its dog days.